everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Emma, and if you're not new here, it is time for another monthly reading wrap up. And you may also notice that I am in a completely different filming setup than I usually am. I am doing a full reorganization of my library because I don't think I've ever said it on this channel, but not only is it my library, it's also my office. So that's what's getting reorganized right now, and it's kind of too much of a mess to be filming in there. So for today, we're in a new setup, and that is my bedroom. Some quick stats. In February, I read 14 books, which is insane, but technically 11 of those are novellas. Nonetheless, I feel really proud to have gotten through that many, and I'm way ahead for my reading goal. In no particular order, here are all the books I read in the month of February. I'm gonna start off with the novellas because there were so many of them. Because Valentine's Day was in February, I was in the mood for romance and just short, cute, sweet stories. So I decided to pick up both the Improbable Meet Cute and the Improbable Meet Cute Second Chance collections. If you guys haven't heard of these, it's essentially a collection of short stories all written by different romance authors, some of which were new to me authors and others written by romance authors that I absolutely love and adore already. And I'm not gonna dive too much into my thoughts on all of them. One, because there's a lot of them and we would be here forever, but two, because I actually have a reading vlog up right now of me reading all of those. So if you guys would be interested, I'll have it linked up here somewhere if you want to go check that video out. But I will rapid fire tell you what I rated all of them. The exception to the rule, I rated 3.75 out of 5 stars. Rosie and the Dreamboat, I rated 2.5 out of 5 stars. Drop, Cover, and Hold On, I rated 2.75 out of 5 stars. With Any Luck, I rated 3 out of 5 stars. Royal Valentine, I rated 2 out of 5 stars. Accidentally Yours, I rated 3 out of 5 stars. Time Will Tell, I rated 3.5 out of 5 stars. Second Act Romance was a 2.5 out of 5 stars. A Play for Love was 3 out of 5 stars. Death to Valentine's Day was 2 out of 5 stars, and finally Valentine's Slay was 2.5 out of 5 stars. And I know that a lot of those ratings might seem really low, but normally for me, when it's a novella or short story, my 3-star is like my cap. It is very rare that I rate a novella or short story higher than 3 stars. So the ones that I gave like 2 and 2.5 stars to, in my mind, that's still a really good rating considering how short it was. There definitely were a few favorites of mine out of this collection, but overall, I just had such a fun time reading these. None of them are anything I'm gonna be thinking about or obsessing over, but it was so fitting to read these little stories right before Valentine's Day, and it got me in the giddy, giggly, happy, romantic mood. I genuinely don't think there could have been a better time of year for me to read these than in February. Moving on to the books that are not short stories, I read 3 different fantasy romance books in the month of February, and somehow all of them ended up being urban fantasy. Although going into each of these books, I only knew that one of them was an urban fantasy, so it definitely wasn't intentional. It's just interesting to me that all of them happen to be urban fantasies, which also isn't a sub-genre of fantasy that I read often. The first one was City of Gods and Monsters, which I actually started in January and finished in February, and it took me so long to get through this book, and I'm not fully sure why. I've been seeing this book getting talked about on the internet for a while, but my mom read it not too long ago and was recommending it to me, so that urged me to go ahead and pick it up and start it. I often hear people comparing it to Crescent City, but really, other than the fact that it's an urban fantasy, I don't see much of a comparison there. This is about our main character, Lauren, who's a human in a city full of different types of monsters and creatures and all sorts of different supernatural beings. And in this world, there's a group called the Dark Slayers, which are essentially just supernatural bounty hunters, and in one way or another she ends up teaming up with Dark Slayer Damien. And that's all I'm really gonna say about it because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read it yet. I did really enjoy this book and I thought it was a fun time, but I will say something about Kayla Edwards' writing maybe just didn't click with me. I kind of felt like I was getting whiplash while reading it, just with the amount of random info dumping, and just like I would be told something in explicit detail and then sit there and think like, why did I need to know that right now? I will say this is the first book in a series, so maybe if I continue the series, that kind of random info dumping will start to make more sense. But also, it's not like the story itself was confusing. I never felt too lost in the magic system or world building, but there's just a lot of it going on and a lot of it being thrown at you constantly, and there's also a lot of characters and names to remember. And I don't mind complicated in a fantasy, but I think just something about the way that information was delivered to me didn't click with me. It wasn't like my favorite thing as a reader. And I think because of that feeling, I almost was getting like tired of the story. Not that I wasn't enjoying it, but it just kind of felt like it took a lot of effort to get myself to keep reading. I also don't mind a long book, but I think this one was a little bit too long for what we got out of it. Again, if I continue the series, my thoughts on that may change completely because I don't really know how the story progresses from here. But just for the first book, those were all my little bones to pick with it. But I also don't want it to seem like I'm hating on this book. I actually really enjoyed it and ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. And I think that 4-star mainly comes from the fact that I loved the romance in it. I also really enjoyed a lot of the side characters, more so than our main character, honestly. And like the main plot of it, I was super intrigued by. It was just the like side quest plots going on that I think lost me throughout the book. I am definitely still intrigued by it and would be interested in continuing the series, but I'm not like dying to jump into the next book right now. The next urban fantasy romance I read in the month of February is Fallen Gods by Rachel Van Dyken. And this one was interesting to me because some parts of it felt almost like it could be satirical. And I also have mixed feelings about this book because to me the description of the book on the back did not really match with like the story we were actually getting as I was reading it. But I also think I was maybe being a little bit harsher on it because it's not what I was expecting it to be, and I wasn't really in the mood for another urban fantasy because I had already read one that month. And then I picked it up and started reading it, and it was another urban fantasy. So that's probably on me and just like my own expectations. Overall, I did really enjoy this book. This is about Indir University and our main character, whose name I am at a loss for right now. I don't know. Anyway, she gets sent to this university basically on a mission from her father because the university is essentially run by enemies, and this is all based in Norse mythology. And there's like this idea that the gods they're descended from are like myths or like they don't exist anymore. So it's fantasy, but it's really not that heavily involved with a magic system. It's more just like talked about in the context of the world they live in. I don't know if that makes any sense. And then our love interest gets introduced. It's definitely set up to be like an enemies to lovers, but I never really felt that enemy kind of tension. It was more like a dislike to lovers. I will say it was pretty slow burn, and I think the slow burn aspect of it was done well. But let me just tell you, the male main character's name is quite literally Erik Erikson. I'm gonna say it again, Erik Erikson. Apologies if that is someone's name out there, but I just like for some reason couldn't get over that, and it was making me laugh every time I read that. And then also, like I said, it's based in Norse mythology, so they're quite literally referencing Thor and Loki and Thor's hammer Mjolnir. And as a Marvel fan, that was also kind of hard for me to get past, which I think at one point in the story, one of the main characters says something like, oh, I hate how we're always being compared to like Marvel comics. So I like get that like Norse mythology existed before Marvel was a thing, but because I have that correlation, it was hard to get it out of my head. All of that said, I did try to separate this story from what I already know, but like every time they mentioned Thor, I was picturing Chris Hemsworth. And every time they mentioned Loki, I was picturing Tom Hiddleston. And like there is literally a character in the story named Odin, and I was picturing whoever that actor is that plays Odin in Marvel. So I think, again, kind of on me, I just was struggling to disconnect what was happening in this book from what I already knew about these characters in the context of the MCU. I think probably my favorite part about this book was the college university setting. I love any like academic setting, any school, any like training type of setting in a fantasy book especially, so that was really fun. And I remember thinking while reading it that it kind of gave me vibes of the TV show Wednesday on Netflix if they were older and it was based in Norse mythology. I do believe this was Rachel Van Dyken's first fantasy, and she usually writes like regular contemporary romance. So considering that, I think it was pretty well done, but just like I said, some aspects of it felt satirical to me, and maybe that's on me, maybe that was the writing, I'm not really sure, but it's definitely not something that I was obsessed with, but it was a really fun read. I don't know if there's gonna be other books coming out in this series. It does say on Goodreads Fallen Gods #1, so I'm guessing there will be a #2 at some point, and I couldn't really say one way or the other if I think I will pick up book 2. I did really like it. I enjoyed it for what it was, but in the grand scope of the copious amounts of fantasy romance I've read, I don't know that it's something I'm gonna be like remembering a lot, but I did rate it 4 stars because I remember when I finished it being like, oh, that was really fun and unique, and like I never felt like I had to like force myself through the story. I was just there enjoying it, having a good time. And then the last urban fantasy romance and last book I read in February was The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Lindy. I've actually owned this book for a while. I received the art copy of it, and I've always like felt a pull towards this book. Like I see it over there on my shelves and I'm like, should I pick this one up? But for some reason I never have until this month, and I'm very glad that I did. Like I said, I just like kind of was in a mindset of being sick of reading urban fantasy romance, because this is another one that I went into it thinking it was going to be more of a traditional fantasy or a high fantasy, and it was not, but I was pleasantly surprised with what I did get out of this book. First, I'm just going to say one of the most interesting things about the world building and setup of this book is that it's set in a future New York City, but it's still fantasy, and essentially the background to how we've ended up in this version of New York City is that at one point, humans discovered that monsters are actually real, and there's a war because no one can get along, and then they end up signing a treaty so that the humans and monsters will get along and live in peace. Spoiler alert, minorly, if it's not obvious already, that doesn't end up working out, and now we are in future New York City where this treaty is in place, but everyone kind of has their own groups, and the monsters don't really associate with the humans. And we're following our main character, Kierce, who is a thief. She ends up getting assigned this mission to steal something from a Holly library and comes face to face with one of the monsters. But then they kind of end up forming sort of like a truce or a pact, because they realize that if they work together, they can both achieve things they want. I'm trying to explain this without giving spoilers, but essentially they start working together. I really, really enjoyed both our female main character and our male main character, and I also really, really loved the tension and slow burn of the romance in this story. There was also a lot of really enjoyable side characters, and this book has a lot of side quests in it, and I know I complained about that being an aspect in City of Gods and Monsters, and in a way this book is kind of similar to that, but I didn't mind the side quests as much in this one, and I felt like we got to know these side characters on the side quests a lot better than you normally would in that type of plot line. I feel like I'm not making sense and I'm just rambling. And I also thought it was fun that there's tons of different monsters and like groups in this story. So there's werewolves, vampires, warlocks, wraiths, like literally anything you can think of from across fantasy ever is in this story. And I thought it was really cool how K.A. Lindy wrote that into the way New York City operates. So like different sections of New York City were housing different groups of people. Like the Upper East Side was like the higher, like more established rich monsters, but then you would have like gangs and stuff and like almost like a mafia type vibe amongst the werewolves, and they were in like their own section of New York City. There was like a whole underground group. Like it was just very well thought out, I think, of how she incorporated this idea of like the real world having monsters in it. This also was the first book in a series, and I do think I lean more towards wanting to continue this one, but we will see. I ended up rating this one 4.25 out of 5 stars. And those are all the books I read in February 2026. I would love to know if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Also, be sure to check out my March TBR video to see what's on my radar for this month. It's on my channel right now. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. subscribe so you can see more videos like this in the future. And I will have my Instagram, TikTok, and Goodreads linked in the description below if you'd be interested in following me on my other platforms and checking out all of my other content. I feel like February was a really interesting reading month, but still a really good reading month. That's all for now. Thanks again for watching. Bye guys.